On today's episode, we welcome Chad Ford back to the show, and we dive into the principles found in his new book, 70 times 7. From conflict styles and fear to radical forgiveness and rolling away stones, Chad shares principles, tips, and stories that will touch your heart, lift you up, and change your mind. Chad Ford is an international conflict mediator, facilitator, and peace educator with over 2 decades of experience in conflict zones worldwide. While known for his ESPN basketball analysis, his true passion is peace building. After completing degrees from George Mason and Georgetown, he spent nearly 20 years directing BYU Hawaii's peace building program before joining Utah State University in 2024. Author of Dangerous Love and 70 times 7, Chad brings unique insights from working with diverse groups, from families to governments, transforming conflict into peace through his Christian-informed approach. We hope you enjoy the show.
Welcome to Stronger Marriage Connection. I'm Dr. Liz Hale, along with the beloved professor, Dr. Dave Schramm. Together, we have dedicated our life's work to bringing you the best we have in valid marital research, along with a few tips and tools to help you create the marriage of your dreams. All right. Well, Dave, I'm so pleased to have Chad Ford back. He was the author of Dangerous Love, Transforming Fear and Conflict at Home, at Work, and in the World. And he's back today by popular demand. He is a peacemaker and a conflict transformer who stands boldly in the face of fear in his work as a mediator and now professor at Utah State University. Well, today, Chad is joining us to take a deep dive into his brand new book, red hot off the press, 70 times 7, based on conflict transformation. Welcome back to Stronger Marriage Connection, dear Chad Ford.
It's a pleasure to be back and really deeply appreciate the work that you do, right? So much of our conflict starts right in the closest relationships to us. Yeah, right at home.
Oh, true. Mm-hmm. Well, we're so glad to have you. And you are really everywhere. I have the pleasure of being on your Waymaker email list and can follow you like the true fan that I am. So I love that. Chad, I'd love for you to share, let's start right there if you don't mind, the meaning of Waymaker, just to give a small hint about this group and your current mission.
Yeah, so I do a lot of different conflict practices. Sometimes I'm a conflict coach. Sometimes I'm working as a mediator between two parties that are in conflict. Sometimes I'm working with much larger groups and really do what I call conflict facilitation. But the thing that I think all three of those things have in common is that when people feel stuck in conflict, when they feel like they don't have any alternatives, when they feel like conflict is happening to them, but they don't really have any way to navigate through it, that's the sort of work that I do, right? I help people who feel like there's no way find a way. And it's hard work. They are going to have to walk whatever path that is. And so we try to make the way for other people to be able to walk when they feel stuck in conflict.
I just love that. So you make a way out of no way, right?
Yeah.
I think that's way cool. Had you heard that before, Dave?
No.
Makes a way out of no way.
Yeah. It's an old Irish proverb, so I can't say that I came up with it myself. But as someone who comes from Ireland, and my ancestors come from Ireland, I always love pulling in the Irish proverbs whenever I can.
I love it, especially that one.
Yeah, it's yours now, Chad. It's yours now. Yeah, Chad, Liz and I are Ford fans, I guess you could call us. We love your great work that you've done in both books. You say, Chad, that conflict is rooted in fear. So tell us, where and how does fear most commonly show up in marriage?
Well, I think that it shows up in a couple of ways. And one of the first ways we can think about it is our conflict styles that we bring to a marriage. And there's several styles that I think are deeply rooted in fear. The first and by far the most predominant is conflict avoidance, right? I just am going to avoid conflict at all costs if I can. And I think a lot of people carry with that this feeling that if I'm experiencing conflict in my marriage, something is wrong, right? Something is wrong with me. Maybe I chose the wrong partner. Maybe I'm the wrong partner for someone else. Instead of seeing conflict as something that's natural, that of course is going to occur in any relationship, but especially one as intimate as marriage, where two people are trying to blend their lives together, conflict is the most natural thing in the world. In fact, Dr. John Gottman has shown that when couples aren't arguing, right? When there isn't conflict, that is a significant red flag that things are actually going south. And so I think that for a lot of couples, especially, there's this feeling of, I want to get to this place in our marriage where we don't have conflict anymore. When I actually think the right way to think about it is, I want to get to a place in my marriage where I do conflict well with my partner, right? But because I'm fearing conflict, avoidance is far from doing conflict well, right? It's bearing it until there's so much resentment and so much, I think, this sense of frustration with my partner in the marriage, that then when it does bubble up to the surface, it becomes destructive conflict, and conflict that harms and destroys marriages. That's the most obvious way where I think fear just shows up, right? Is that we don't talk about it, we don't discuss it, we pretend it's not there, we hope it goes away, but we don't actually actively step into it. But I think there's a couple of other ways that it shows up in marriage that they don't look like fear, but I actually think that fear is driving them. One is conflict accommodation, right? Where what I think the right thing to do in a marriage is just to give in to my partner. Every time there's a disagreement, every time you and I don't see eye to eye, what I'm supposed to do as a good partner is look at you and say, okay, whatever you want. If it's important to you, then it's important to me. And this sort of selflessness. But I actually find that most of the time it's not very selflessness. It's actually quite selfish, because what it's saying is, I think that you liking me is the most important thing. And the way that you like me is by me doing whatever it is that you expect me or want me to do. And so it comes with this deep fear that you won't like me if I bring my needs, if I bring my concerns, if I bring my desires or wants to the marriage, that you won't like me anymore. And so I'm going to accommodate to be loved. And then competition, where I feel like if you get what you want, it's going to destroy what it is that I want. And so I need to win every conflict in a marriage. I actually think this is also driven by fear. The fear of, if something doesn't go my way, it's going to somehow be destructive to the relationship, or maybe it means that I'm not right in the relationship. And so I'm actively out pursuing winning in marriage instead of collaborating. And so I think that fear, it doesn't look the same in every marriage, right? But I think that the underlying thing that is driving this in each of those cases is a fear of conflict and the fear of somehow not getting what it is that I want or need.
Yeah, man, well said, Chad. So I'm curious then, what's the best way for partners to address these fears with each other?
Well, I think one, there's conflict styles tests. We have one on my website at dangerouslovebook.com, but there's many that you can get out there. I think it's helpful at first to actually understand what it is that's going on. And when you take these tests, I think it's actually really important that you think about your partner when you're taking this test. All right. There's general conflict styles that we have, but then there are unique ones that we have in particular relationships to people. And it's most helpful if I'm thinking about in a marriage, my partner, when I am taking this test. And then I have to ask myself, okay, why am I here? Why is this the style that I find myself using? And then I ask a couple of questions of my clients. One, is it working? I already know the answer if they've hired me. If they've hired me as a conflict mediator, the answer is no, but I still ask the question. I think it's really important, right? You're doing this style. You're following a pattern again and again. There's a reason behind it. So let me ask you, is it working? And usually I'll get the honest answer, no, it's not. Okay, it's not working, then why are you doing it? And a lot of times there's a long history of that. We learn our conflict styles typically from our parents. We learn it from past relationships. If conflict has felt dangerous or scary to us in the past, right, we find ways of coping with it or navigating it in a way to try to avoid fear or pain in the future. So what's going on? Is it actually working? And if it's not working, am I willing to try something different? And often where people go is sometimes in an opposite direction that isn't any more helpful, right? So if I've been competitive, okay, I get it. What I just need to do is just always say yes, always give in. I just need to accommodate. That's what I need to do. And I think that, part of my job as a conflict mediator or a coach or what have you is educating people about how to do good collaboration. And I just feel like we talk a lot about collaboration. It's a mantra that's used in organizations, but when it comes to actual training, where I've been trained on how to collaboratively problem solve with another person, most of the people that I encounter, they just don't have that skill set. They want to do that. They're open to it. They just don't really know how. And because they don't know how, it gets frustrating really quickly. And then they revert back to whatever style is most comfortable for them.
Mm-hmm. So I love that, Chad. So first discovering, what's my conflict style? And there's tests, there's things on your website, asking yourself, is this working? Probably not. And now what can I do about it? Humility, this authenticity approach to being open, to be like, okay, I can do things differently. I can see things differently. Am I open to doing it? Man, I love it. Love.
Yeah. And one other thing I'd add, Dr. Dave, is an acceptance that I just have to have that the goal isn't a conflict-free marriage, right? I have to accept to a certain extent that marriage and conflict go hand in hand. If I want to be married to someone, especially someone who is not a clone of myself, then I am going to be experiencing conflict. And I think it's that dialectic of acceptance about certain things. Conflict is inevitable. It's going to be happening in our marriage. And there are things that I can change that improve the quality of the conflict and move it from destructive to constructive. It's those two things hand in hand, right? It's an acceptance of the conflict and a willingness to change the dynamics to improve it.
And I just think that word, Chad, that acceptance, for our listeners right now are thinking, okay, my marriage is not off the rails. If there's, where we have this conflict, it's called normal, right? It means maybe if we're stuck in different patterns, but man, conflict, any two people are going to have differences, that it's going to lead to conflict. So I love that acceptance.
From destructive to instructive. Did I get that right?
Constructive.
There we go. Constructive. I knew it wasn't quite right. Right. Instructive probably helps too, but constructive I like even better. So how does this way we handle conflict at home? So both in marriage and with children, as a family in general, how does that affect, you think, Chad, our broader ability to deal with conflict even as a society?
Well, I think it all starts in the home. And when I work with organizations, or even when I work in socio-political conflicts, which I do a lot of, it's always relational. Conflict is always relational. Every story that I've heard about conflict, from political leaders, from government leaders, from social leaders, from religious leaders, it comes back to there's been a breach. There's been a relational breach. There's been an expectation about how a relationship should go, and typically I'm blaming the other person for the breach. Let's just be honest, right? That's most of our conflict narratives. And someone else has breached that expectation in a way that's been really painful for me. It's hurt me. And because it's hurt me, I expect them to repair the breach. And when they repair the breach, then there can be some level of reconciliation. But, if you think about that pattern, you can see why we don't get very far in conflict, right? Because there's been a breach and I blame that breach on you, conflict is happening to me. I'm not involved in a pattern of conflict. It is something that's happened to me. Therefore, all the blame lies with you, and all of the changing that needs to happen also lies with you. And I'm going to sit here and patiently or impatiently wait, right, for that to change. And that's where we get these narratives of real helplessness in marriage, because I know my husband needs to change, or I know my wife needs to change. And here's the list of all the things they need to change, but they won't. And because they won't, they continue to hurt me and do damage. And the more that I press them to change, the more that I blame them, the more that I push and push and push, they seem to dig in and resist back. It's almost like the more that I complain to them, the more they double down on the very thoughts and behaviors that are causing the conflict in the first place. And I think it's a deep misunderstanding of human nature, including our own, because we all know that when we feel blamed, when other people take themselves out of a conflict pattern and put it completely on us, our natural response is to be defensive, to dig in, to point out the other things that they're doing that also are contributing to the conflict, which they don't like, and then the conflict escalates. right away. And I don't really see a huge difference between what's going on in marriages, what's going on in parenting, to what's happening in our communities, what's happening with us politically in the world. And we lack those tools at all of those levels. But what I tell people a lot when I'm working with them, even in the socio-political systems, is try it at home first. Start close in. Start with the thing that you have the most control over right now. Very few people have control over the socio-political climate that exists in our country today. I actually think there are things people can do, but it's like PhD level conflict work, right? But the thing that I can do as a parent with a teenager, or the thing that I could do with my spouse, those are the things that are close in where I start to practice these skills. And because conflict is inevitable, and I would argue it happens every day, it's just not always destructive, I can get a lot of practice in doing this well, and then that will serve me well in the organizations that I work for or in other spots like that. But if we don't get it right at home, I find it really hard to be able to do it well anywhere else. So we start close in.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, Chad, if there's one principle, right? You have 10 minutes, maybe you have 30 minutes or whatever. If you have one principle to sit down and talk with couples about conflict transformation, everything that you've learned, what would it be?
Yeah, it's hard to say that there's one. I've tried to distill it down to 4. That I'll talk about briefly. One is seeing people as people, or in my new book, I talk about it from a scriptural reference of loving your enemies, right? Like, I have to look at this person that I'm in conflict with and see their humanity. I can't be angry with people just because there's conflict, just because they don't see the world the same way that I see them. I have to look with eyes of compassion towards people that are struggling, that are misbehaving. I have to be curious about why they're talking or acting that way, why they're making the choices that they're making right now. I need to seek to try to understand what is beneath those behaviors and actions. And I have to give a certain level of empathy or grace to they also are trying to navigate the world the best way that they know how. Now, that doesn't change the fact that we have conflict, and it doesn't mean that there's less work for us to do. But I think when I'm approaching a person that I'm in conflict with a bit of compassion, with a bit of empathy, and saying, this isn't going well, and I suspect it's also not going well for you. This is really frustrating to me, but I suspect it's also frustrating for you. I have some things in my past that are being triggered right now by this conversation, but I suspect you have a story as well right now. I lashed out today, but you know what? I skipped breakfast and lunch. I was so busy, and I'm hangry right now. But you also have a story. I haven't been around you all day. I don't actually know what's been going on, right? I'm going to take that deep breath. That starts a reverse of a cycle where destructive conflict typically requires a level of dehumanization and blame, where I am deeply intolerant of what the other person is thinking or saying. And it opens me up, I think, in a really powerful way. The second thing I say is that we practice inside-outside transformation. We don't throw stones, right? Throwing stones at our partners beget more stones. When we have blame, that we feel like, I need to confront this to you, I need to show you how bad you are, and I throw that stone, it wounds other people. They get defensive, and they have their own stones that they've been carrying around with them, waiting to toss them back. And I'm always surprised. Couples are always surprised when they're like, okay, I'm in mediation. I finally get to say everything that I want to say to my partner right now. And then they're shocked when they have a response back that says, well, let me tell you a few things that aren't working for me. They're like, wait. They'll like, look at me. Wait, this isn't supposed to be happening in the mediation right now, right? This is my time to bombard this person with stones right now. And I don't expect them back. And I think human nature is that they're going to come back. And so how do we roll away those things, right? How do we find ways to call people in instead of call people out? Right? How do I call you into the relationship and say, this behavior is hurting us? And because it's hurting us, and because I care about us, and because I care about our relationship going forward, how can we work on this so that we strengthen our relationship instead of how do I condemn you because of the things that you're doing that are weakening it. And I just found that people respond to that so much better because it starts with a signal of actually what I want is better relationship with you. And the reason that we're having this hard conversation today is because what I want is for us to be stronger. But when we're throwing stones, I think what happens on the other side is it feels like what you want is to hurt me or punish me or call me out, push me out of the relationship, somehow single me out in ways that aren't going to make me feel disconnected. To me, the hardest step, though, those are both hard, but to me, the hardest step is I see in virtually every conflict in marriage, maybe the best, which is I'm willing to make some changes when they make some changes first. I'm willing to do this or this or this, but first you need to assure me that you're going to do this, this, and this. And then afterwards, I'll reciprocate. And I find that in most marriages, that's happening on both sides. There's been a breach of trust. And because there's been a breach of trust, the other party feels like the only way to rebuild trust is for you to go first, right? And to repair that trust. And once you repair it, then I can start working on coming closer. And so we get stuck in these patterns of I'm insisting that the other person go first. And so I call this the risk of embrace in my new book, but who's going to be the first person to open up our arms and signal to the other person, I'm willing to make some changes here that I think will improve the relationship. These are the things that I see that I could do that could be helpful to you. And so one of the patterns that I follow in this sort of problem solving part of conflict is instead of asking people, what is it? Okay, now tell me what you need from the other person after we've had this long conversation, is to actually ask people, what did you hear from your partner about what they need? Can you think of 3 things just over the course of our conversations that you've heard from your partner that you need? Now, could you pick one of those things and offer it to your partner, right? Do you think you could just pick one of them right now and offer it? And then I ask the partner, would that be helpful if they offered that to you? And if they say yes, then what would it look like specifically, right, to make that happen? If I say I need more respect around the home, like what does respect look like specifically? And how would I know that I was actually showing you more respect in the home? Like what specifically would that look like? And so we're starting that process of collaboration where we're willing to go first to offer something that often is powerfully invitational to the other person. And then finally, especially in marriage, of all the sort of places, right? We're not practicing conflict management. We're not just practicing conflict resolution. We're practicing reconciliation. This is about transforming our relationship. This is not just about problem solving. It's transforming our relationship in such a way that any problem that comes our way, we're going to be able to navigate it together in an effective way. And what we're actually doing in this whole process is strengthening the relationship so that we can navigate those relationships more effectively.
It was so powerful. I just want to kind of do the brief, the 4 steps. Okay, dear Chad. So the first one was really seeing people's humanity, right? Loving our enemies. And then 2, what was 2, please? In the short.
Don't throw stones.
Yeah. Oh, that was don't throw stones. I had that as 3. Okay. And then 3
the
was
risk of embrace.
Risk of embrace. Love that. And then the 4 is the reconciliation.
Yeah. Practice reconciliation.
We'll be right back after this brief message. And we're back. Well, let's dive right in.
I love that. In 70 times 7, you explore the power of forgiveness and healing some pretty deep wounds. Can we use those principles in marriage across the board for the small, the medium, and the deep wounds?
Yeah. It's interesting. When people talk about forgiveness, I see it as a step of reconciliation. I don't see it as the end all and be all because I think there are other things that have to be attached to reconciliation, not just forgiveness. Because I've seen forgiveness really misused in ways that allow for bad behavior to continue, allow for people to continue to suffer from abuse, because we follow this idea of, well, we're supposed to forgive everyone. But I actually think when you look at this, whether you're looking at it both from an academic standpoint or you're looking at it from a religious standpoint, that there's 4 factors that are kind of coming into reconciliation. Truth. I'm honestly being accountable for my actions, thoughts, and behaviors. How difficult is it to forgive someone when they refuse to take accountability, when they refuse to even talk about the things that are happening, right? And so often you'll hear this, well, you should forgive, but I shouldn't confess. I shouldn't be open about what it is that I might have been contributing to the conflict. Forgiveness is one of them. Justice is another one. If someone has been hurt as part of this conflict, how do I make them whole? I'm not interested at all in the justice that destroys or punishes, but I am really interested in the justice that makes people whole, right? And if the conflict has carved a significant wound in my life, and I don't want to address it anymore, let's just forgive and forget. The wound, in my opinion, still festers there. And so how do I actually go about making this right, the wrong that I've made? And then finally, the last step is, how do I give us confidence that this isn't going to happen again? And I'm not talking about conflict. Conflict for sure is going to happen again, but I'm talking about destructive conflict or serious breaches, right, of the marital relationship. What am I going to work on? How can I show you and give you confidence, Liz, that these behaviors that I've engaged in the past, I am actively working on making changes. I'm going to therapy, right? I'm going to counseling, whatever it is, to show you and to give you confidence and trust that I recognize that repeating these mistakes again and again and again in marriage will continue us down the path of destruction. And so I think that they all go together, right? And they're all things that we offer people in conflict. They're not just things that we expect from others, but there's things that we offer. We offer truth without justification. We offer a sense of accountability without blame. We forgive people when they come asking for forgiveness. And when I say forgiveness, I say, I'm going to remove that barrier that I put in place, that sort of protective barrier, right? That has kept us from each other now. Forgiveness means I'm moving that away. I'm not bringing it up every time that you come a step near to me. Oh, remember when, right? Here it is again. I'm seeking to make sure that whatever damage I did in the conflict, I do whatever I can. And sometimes I recognize it's not easy to make you whole. And I'm going to keep working on myself and be very open to that towards you, so that you see that I'm committed to this relationship. And part of my commitment to it is that I'm going to continue to work on myself so I can be the best partner I can be to you.
Yeah, it's just so rich. You know, there's a part of me, I have to be honest, that would just really love to forgive and forget. Let's just let bygones be bygones. You know what I mean? Let's just kind of go along our way. And you're suggesting that I really have to right the wrongs. I really have to understand from that person's perspective, wait a minute, where was I wrong here? In your eyes, I probably have a blind spot to it.
Yeah.
I'm kind of like, what's the word? Kind of cowardly when I just want to do, let's just forgive and forget, move on.
I find when that happens, the conflict tends to reappear.
I can imagine.
Right. I know as therapists, you know that the right strategy isn't to bury it, right? Whatever's going on, right? And you know, I'm really good at that. I was kind of taught that as a young person, right? Like when you have a problem, just bury it deep inside you, right? And I've done a lot of digging and a lot of burying in my life, and I've noticed even in my own life, it finds its way up. No matter how deep I bury it, it keeps crawling back to the surface. And I use sometimes this analogy. I call it the grocery store analogy. Like if you think that you've moved on, let's say you've cut somebody off, you've created these really strong boundaries, you know, I'm done with it. and you run into them in a grocery store 3 years later. And it's the first time you've seen them in 3 years. Can you walk up to them? Can you embrace them? Can you say, hey, it's great to see you, and move on? Or are you filled suddenly with all of that conflict again? Does all of it just come bursting back out, and you do everything possible to avoid seeing or interacting with that person? And if it's the latter, all it tells me is you've carried it. You didn't forget at all, right? You just carried it with you for 3 years. And there's so much that you've carried with you that is probably infected the way that you are in relationship with lots of other people that's been completely invisible to you. And so that's how I know, right? If we've really opened our hand up and let go, is that if I've really reconciled with a person, even if it was our choice to not be in the same relationship anymore, or to not interact with each other in the ways that we've done before, I should be able to embrace them in the grocery store, ask them a little bit about their family and how they're doing, and be able to move on and not need to instantly call my therapist and say, I'm having a panic attack right now. I just ran into Dave at the grocery store.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I love that. What did you call that embrace? What's that embrace called? So the
risk of embrace.
The risk. Yeah, I love that. I love the risk of embrace.
Yeah. That concept comes from a guy named Miroslav Volf, who was a theologian who was writing during the Bosnian War and looking at what was happening with the Serbians and the Bosnians during really what was a very brutal ethnic war. And he's trying to rectify that many of these folks are Christians kind of going after each other in this way. And how do we think about taking that risk of embrace with our enemy? And I always find it so fascinating, his approaches, because you think embrace is easy, but he's like, there's really 4 steps to embrace. I'd never really thought about this before, right? Like breaking down like what an embrace does. But it starts with someone gesturing to the other person, like opening up their arms, opening up their hands to the other person, inviting embrace, right? It almost, you watch, even in your social cues or signals, someone will signal to the other person an embrace is coming, right? That the second part I think is really fascinating, and it's that can be scary, especially if I'm in conflict. I don't know whether the other person is going to step into that embrace. I don't know if they're going to punch me in the face. Like, I don't really know what's going to happen. But he says the second step, and I never really thought about this before, is that we actually wait. We don't just collapse into someone else's space and grab them. We wait for them to take the step into the embrace, right? I signal to you that I'm open. And then you signal back whether you are open or not. And you signal that back by you either stepping into that embrace or you don't. I've got teenagers right now, and we're teaching them about consent, and as they're starting to date, and we're teaching about reading body language and not just verbal language, and how important it is, because those moments that are deeply intimate, that are deeply vulnerable for us, when I signal to someone else like, hey, I think I would like to hug you, or I would like to hold your hand, or I would like a kiss, are really vulnerable moments, but they're vulnerable for both parties. And the other party just might not be there yet. And you have to be so alive to that and be patient and not push that, and give them space to walk in. And a lot of times I know I'm gung-ho in conflict resolution. Like, I want to charge in. I want to give the flying squirrel hug. And I just know that once we're like this, like, you're going to feel great. And instead of giving the other person the space to walk in, then the embrace part is easy, right? We close our arms around each other and we embrace. But then I love the 4th step too, which is that I let go, and let them step out of space. I have enough trust for you that I don't need to cling to you with all of my might. And never let you go. It actually shows that I don't trust you when I do that. I'm afraid that this embrace is going to end and it might not happen again. I show some trust and respect by opening my arms back up and saying, you're free to come whenever you want, but I'm not going to trap you now in an embrace.
Now that I've got you, right? I'm not going to. Yeah, that's perfect.
Unless you're my wife and she's hugging one of our teenagers, and then she doesn't let go and they're trying to escape, right?
Well, and that's where I experienced the most, right? Like, I mean, he's writing about like Bosnian and Serbians, but where I really experience that is with teenagers, right? Because there's this weird moment that many teenagers hit where they don't want their parents to touch them anymore. They don't want physical touch. They think it's weird, and it's so hurtful. as a parent, right? It's so like, and they need it. They need it. They need embrace, but they don't know they need it. And whenever they do it, we go overboard too much, right? And then we overdo it and freak them out, and they don't want to do it again. Exactly right.
Oh man, Jack, unpacking forgiveness a little bit more. Going back to some of that, I'm curious. You've written about radical forgiveness. I'm curious, what does that look like for a spouse to practice that kind of forgiveness in the face of betrayal or this long-standing hurt? Can you walk us through this radical forgiveness idea?
Well, I think to me the radical part of forgiveness is from my end, not from what I'm expecting from other people, but from my end. You're going to get forgiveness no matter what. And when I say that, what I mean is you can expect that in my relationship, that is part of what I'm going to give in the relationship. And what I mean by it is that I am not going to cut off our relationship just because you've done or said something hurtful. I may need to change the nature of the relationship. I'm right. The relationship itself may need to change for safety reasons, for example, that we may have to change the nature of it. But what we're not in risk of is you being excommunicated from my life, of you being cut off from that. I will continue to seek relationship with you. We may have to redefine it. We may have to put some boundaries on it, but not boundaries to punish or to keep us away, but boundaries that help the relationship go right in ways that maybe it didn't go right in the future. But what you can expect from me is that there will be a continued commitment to us. And I think that opens up so much vulnerability on the other side. I think that's what invites actual truth. We think about, like, for infidelity for a reason. Why do they hide it? And their fear is, right, that it's going to hurt the other person. But I even think their bigger fear is that it is going to end us in ways that I don't want us to end. And I think that there are ways to create the space where, it may affect us. It may change something about us, depending on like what that behavior is. But what I'm really interested in doing is finding a way to create the best us going forward. And I think that all of us fear that our partners maybe don't want that, that they're not that invested radically in the relationship, that this is a relationship that I'm committed to and ongoing. And so when I've made a breach, and like I find couples lying to each other over much, much less than infidelity, right? Like they're keeping so many things from there. And every time what's driving it is fear, right? What is going to happen to me if I say this thing because I've made a mistake? And what we try to talk about is reversing the question into what is going to happen to us if I don't, right? And it's not about self-preservation or even you preservation. It's about us preservation. And some of the trust that I have to give to my partner when I've hurt is that the trust can include you deserve to be hurt, right? Like it's completely reasonable that what I've done is causing you pain or anger or frustration. I accept that because of what I've done. I also trust you that there's enough of us in there that at some point we're going to be able to talk about this. At some point we're going to be able to practice truth and mercy and justice and peace. And if the consequences of that are that we have to change the nature of the relationship, because sometimes that's just the real consequence of actions like that, we remain committed to reforming that relationship in the best possible way. I just think about divorces all the time and think about how beautiful it would be for children if partners who divorced found a way to reform their relationship in a way that allowed them to be their best selves because of the impact that it would have on the children. That doesn't mean staying in the marriage if that's not the right way to be our best selves together. But if there was an intentionality as we're transitioning from one relationship to another, that we're practicing this and finding a better rhythm, a better pattern for us, so that our kids can see us interacting in this way, so our kids don't get stuck in the middle of things being torn apart. And in fact, in a way that actually means divorce could be healthier because we found the best version of us, right? To work together. And that's what we want our children to see. And every encounter is the best version of us, so that they can model healthy relationships as they get older. And I fear most of the time that's not happening because I refuse to forgive, because I refuse to, because I feel like justice really means punishing or hurting the other side, because I don't believe in other people's capacity to change, because I refuse to be accountable or own up. The devastation that's laid in the wake for so many families, to me, it isn't worth it. It just isn't worth it.
Conflict kills us, doesn't it? Kills kids. It kills us as former partners or current partners. Yeah, you're so right, John.
Destroys us. Yeah.
Only that could be done. I love that. I love that whole mission statement that you have. I'm sure there's many stories that stand out in your mediation work with couples where a marriage was transformed by forgiveness. Is there a particular one you wouldn't mind sharing with us today?
Well, I think one of the most powerful ones, I write a little bit about this in 70 times 7, and I wrote about it because it really stood out to me, was frankly one of the simplest mediations that I ever did, though I didn't expect it to be at the time. I had actually gotten a call from a faith leader who had a couple in the congregation. I actually knew them. They were local. I knew the couple, not super well, but I knew them. And he told me, with their permission, that, they were heading towards divorce, and that he was out of his league in trying to help counsel them and navigate them. They'd gone to marital counseling that had failed and what have you. I don't think he had a lot of hope in saving the marriage, but he thought it would be great if I could at least meet with them and see if we could find a more peaceful way to navigate through, because it was becoming a very high conflict, destructive conflict split. And I would have to be honest, I was like shocked. I didn't even know that was happening. I usually have a pretty good radar for this stuff, but I didn't really see it. And so I called them, and the husband wanted reconciliation. He didn't want the divorce. We talked for a while, anything we could do to save the marriage, what have you. When I talked to his wife, she was ready for the divorce. She'd already hired an attorney. She had made the decision. She didn't really want to have a discussion around a reconciliation, but she was open to thinking about, could we do this in a less conflictual way? Can we do this with the least amount of collateral damage around her? And so she agreed to meet on those terms. And I made it clear that's, we meet on the terms of the parties involved. This is what one party wants. This is what the other party wants. I'm not going to preference one thing or the other. We're going to just have to navigate that through together, but let's just be transparent about why people are coming to the meeting. And I spent a week thinking about them. It always helps as a mediator when you know the couple, and my kids play with their kids. We're in a small community. There's going to be a ripple effect. And I thought I had this amazing plan, but as I was walking to their house, that's how small a community that we live in, I had this idea, and it really changed everything. It was such a powerful idea. I'm like, I'm going to try this. I'd never done this before. And so when I sat down with a couple and said, look, I've heard everything. I think I know what's going on. I'm really just going to ask us to do 3 things today in our first session. And there may not be another session after the first session, but we're just going to do 3 things today. So I asked them to take out a piece of paper. And the first thing I asked them is, can you think of the last time in your memory where you felt deep love towards your partner? I'm right here. Can you think of a memory? It'd even be better if you could tell me a little story about what was going on. But I just want you to take a few minutes. I want you to write down. I saw the husband writing right away. Wife was pausing. That's not a great sign. You could kind of see, like, I'm kind of rolling through the memories, so that it doesn't surprise me in some ways. And he talked about an anniversary trip that was, some like 5 years ago, where they had gone on a trip, and like he thought it was a wonderful trip, and talked about just how close he felt to his partner and everything like that. And then he sort of felt like things kind of went downhill from there. And I asked her, do you remember that trip? And she said, I do. I'm like, did you have the same recollection from the trip? She said, I did not. I was angry that entire trip. And I was angry because that was the place where we'd gone to our honeymoon, and he had been promising for years and years to take me back, and it canceled multiple times because he was so busy with work and so busy prioritizing other things. That by the time we got there, it was like too little, too late. And I actually resented being there. I could see the husband was just wounded by that, right? Like it just kind of blew him away. I don't even think he knew to a certain extent. I think it was the first time that she'd really articulated that. And so I said, okay, your turn. What do you got? And she talked about, I think it was her honeymoon. And so, I mean, they had kids. I mean, it's a long time, right? She went all the way back to who she thought she was marrying and what she thought their relationship was going to be like and how hopeful she was about how things were going to be. And then she added, I didn't ask her, but, she added how disappointing it sort of had been after that the man that she thought that she had married was just not the man that she was married to today. Like, okay, that went okay, not great, but let's do the second step. And the second step was simply to ask them, I want you to think about the other person for a second. What are their biggest fears, challenges, trials that they're facing or going through right now? Can you think about what's hard for them right now? And then I'm going to ask you a second question that's tied to this one as well, which is, can you think of anything you've done, small, medium, or large, that may have actually added to those? Anything, right, that may have been adding to what they're struggling with right now. Husband starts writing right away. Wife is pausing for a minute. Husband starts talking about his addiction to work, his addiction to his career, his complete, and many times, lack of connection to his family, how he told himself again and again that he was doing that for his family, but he can now see why his wife may have felt abandoned, why she may have not felt prioritized, why she may have felt lonely or alone in their marriage, and how he can understand the disappointment because that's not what she signed up for. That's not what he promised. And tears running down his eyes as he engaged in some real truth towards her. She put down her paper, walked over to him, knelt down beside him, and began begging him to forgive her, and began talking about all the ways that she also felt like she had done the same to him, how she had blamed him, how she had not seen him, how she had hurt him in many ways. He stood her up, began holding her. They were crying, they were hugging, they were whispering to each other. I felt really awkward being in the room. It was like a sacred space. And I left. 15 minutes later, I left. I didn't even ask the third question, which was going to be, is there something you feel like you could do for the other person to help make something right? And we engaged in some real conflict mediation. It was, by the way, it didn't solve it overnight, but it put them in the path where they decided they wanted to work on their marriage. And, a while later, there was things that they had to address, patterns that needed to be changed. They both went back into therapy, individual therapy, and were working on that as well. But there was a bond and a connection that turned it around in 15 minutes. I got really excited, by the way, and I thought, I'm going to write a book called The 15-Minute Mediation. And it's going to be like 15 pages, and it's just going to have these steps in it. And I've actually, by the way, for your listeners to know, I've actually tried it. And sometimes this doesn't work at all. In fact, I've actually had a blow up in my face and work the opposite of that, which just goes to show you that, every couple is different and everybody's problems are different. And probably what I could say most about that story was it was a moment where I was in tune enough to what was going on that I asked them the questions that needed to be asked. But, you think about this when we're in conflict, those are not questions we are asking ourselves They're not questions that we're typically thinking about. We're not trying to remind ourselves and bring back memories of warmth and the humanity of our partners. We're not trying to remind ourselves often why we married this person and the good that we see in them. We typically are thinking about our challenges, our struggles, our fears, our problems, and less thinking about what it is that they're carrying with them. We're clear about how the conflict's impacting us. We're typically fairly unclear about how the conflict is impacting them. And we're even blinder to the fact that we might actually be contributing to their pain, their suffering, their woundedness right now. And then because we're blind to those things, we don't typically think that there's something that's within our power to do to make things right? Because we're so busy waiting for the other person to make it right. We're so busy blaming them and trying to shame them into making it right that we forget that we have this power within us to change these dynamics in really, really powerful ways.
Chad, it's just powerful. I'm just thinking about almost breaking it down, the process. Something, I mean, she felt something, right? It takes humility, but she was touched. And when we're open to the influence, right, of other people and allow that to actually melt our hearts in a way, and melt the wall that we've been carrying, or this grudge, or this animosity, feeling, whatever it is, it melted. And then she saw him differently, right? When we see people differently for the authentic them, rather than this annoying person who works too much or, does this and this and this. So I don't know, man, that was just eye-opening. Thanks for sharing that. Powerful. Chad, oh man, we've sure enjoyed our discussion. This has been, just all kinds of insights and questions.
We'll be right back after this brief message. And we're back. Well, let's dive right in.
You write about rolling away the stone. What does that metaphor mean in real life conflict resolution? And in some ways, it kind of reminds me of that story that you just shared, that rolling away.
Yeah. You notice that man in the moment probably had plenty of stones that he could have thrown towards his wife right now. I know he had plenty of complaints. I know it in part because when she went and apologized, she listed a long series of things that I'm sure had wounded him. And so he had a choice right in that moment, right? And now I tried to ask the question in a very specific way to avoid that very behavior, right? But he still had a choice in that moment to actually mishear the question. And frankly, I've heard people do it, or deliberately mishear the question, say, well, I'm not going to talk about that right now. What I need to talk about is my own woundedness. And here are all the ways that you've contributed to it. Rolling away the stones means I see you so clearly in the moment that I'm not interested in giving you what you deserve. I'm interested in giving you what you need. Right? And I think that she turns, Dave, in part because it was the first time he had authentically seen her in a really long time. I think it awoke something within her to finally, my husband sees me. He sees my pain. He sees my suffering. He sees my disappointment. And instead of blaming me for all of that, which he could, he rolled away his stones and instead offered me what I needed in the moment. And there's a apocryphal story that I love that I tell in the book. It comes from a Muslim Sufi from the 14th century, but it's about Jesus. It's not in the Bible, but I find it to be like one of my favorite stories about Jesus. And he's walking through this village, and there's all these people who are yelling at him and swearing at him and giving him curses. And Jesus responds to each person with a blessing. And when he gets to the next town, his apostles come around him and say, why are you doing that? Those people are mistreating you. Why are you giving them blessings? To which he responds, I can only give what is in my purse to give. There are no curses. There are no stones to throw. All I have is blessings to give. When we respond to evil with good, when we respond to hurt with pain and compassion, it has a powerful way of disarming others and inviting them to roll their stones away as well. The conflict dynamics of this have been studied academically. They're proven it even at an international level about how you de-escalate or escalate conflict. But when it's so close to home, right? When it's so personal, it's so easy to forget that. And it's so easy to get ourselves in a protective mode, and our stones are there to push you away and make you say, hey, don't poke the bear here, you're hurting, or maybe to hurt you the way that I feel like you've been hurting me, without any recognition that what we really want, what we really need is embrace. Really hard to embrace when stones are flying back and forth.
Yeah, it is. Wow. Chad, so powerful. Hey, as we wrap things up, we'd love to ask all of our guests. You've been on before, and I'll ask you the same question though, Chad, as far as in honor of the name of our podcast, Stronger Marriage Connection. What do you feel like is a key? What is one of the keys to a stronger marriage connection these days?
Yeah, let me get personal for a minute and talk about my marriage. I'm on a second marriage. I actually had a marriage that ended in divorce, and a very painful one. And my wife did as well. And I'm 7 years into my newest marriage. It is the single most fulfilling relationship that I've ever had in my life. The fire burns brightly between us in really powerful ways. And as I think about what I've learned as I've gotten older and maybe what I'm doing a little differently here than before, it's that whenever conflict comes our direction now, what I hear from it is, when it's coming from my wife, what I hear from it is, Chad, something's not working for me here, but I want it to work. And the reason that I'm frustrated, or the reason that I'm bringing this up, or the reason that I'm talking about it, this is what I hear. It's not always the way it comes out, right, of her mouth or my mouth sometimes, but this is how I choose to hear it every day. What I'm saying here is I want better connection than the connection I had before. And then I step into that. I get curious. I ask questions. I try to find out how to make the adjustments until the connection is bright. And that's an ongoing process. It's something that I feel like is part of the open communication every day. When I was younger, those same conversations felt like attacks to me. They felt like they were questioning me or my character, or questioning whether we should be married or what have you. And I often responded with defensiveness, or frankly, my style was to shut down all the way and just feel very cold and feel bad for myself and feel bad about it anymore. And I've recognized that this is a key element of my marriage, is that I am constantly fine-tuning. I am constantly curious. I'm constantly open to how we will work best together. And I joke with my wife sometimes. It's like I have an ongoing user manual for you, and I keep updating it as I learn more and more about you, because I want to engage with you in the best possible way.
How cool is that?
Yeah.
Thank you for your vulnerability. It's so honest and courageous of you to share about your marriage with Amanda Ford. Sometime we'll look forward to having Amanda Ford on sometime soon. Yeah. So you have tremendous resources and books, Chad. Obviously, we're talking about the 2 books here, but what else? Where can our friends and family of the show go to find out more about you and follow your movement on conflict transformation?
Yeah, so I have a newsletter. I publish a couple times a week. Sometimes they're tips on conflict. Sometimes they're lost chapters. I tend to write much bigger books than the ones that actually get published. They're podcasts and videos and a lot of different things. And you can go to dangerouslovebook.com, and that will take you to my Substack page, or you can go to chadford.substack.com. It'll take you to the same place. sign up for a free newsletter, and in your inbox every couple of weeks, the conflict styles are there. I have a recent article on boundaries and thinking about good boundaries versus bad boundaries and how to navigate those in conflict. And then you can also find when I'm speaking or events or whatever it is that you want help with.
Wonderful. And then the Waymaker is something different then, right?
That is the Waymaker. That is the Waymaker. That's what I call it all, the Waymaker.
I want to make sure I understood. We will link those resources to our show notes. Thank you so much, Chad.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Chad, as we wrap up, we like to ask all of our guests another question. That is your takeaway of the day. We've had, in my mind, one of the richest discussions that I recently remember. Is there a takeaway message, a take-home message, a nugget that you want our listeners to remember from our discussion today?
Yeah, accept that conflict in your relationship isn't a bad thing. It can be a very positive, constructive thing because it can teach us how to better live and love together. Conflict has that really real benefit if we step into it the right way. And if we're avoiding it, if we're doing it badly, it won't have that effect. So skill yourself up. Consider it like a requirement. If I'm going to learn how to fly a plane, I would take lots of pilot lessons. I'll start to skill yourself up on getting better at conflict and watch it dramatically improve the depth and quality of your relationship.
Sure. Love it. Yeah. Liz, what about you? What's your takeaway of the day with Chad Ford?
Well, I love both books, as you know, Dave. And the standout always for me has been The Risk of Embrace in 70 times 7. I always want to say 7 times 70, but it's 70 times 7.
Yeah.
And I love that. And then the 4 steps. I really appreciate the reminder of being open, waiting, and then the embrace, and then the letting go. I think that's just beautiful. That's going to stay with me all day. What about you, dear Dave? What's going to be your rich nugget and that you hope all of us remember from our time today with Dr. Chad Ford?
Yeah, Chad, this has been, as I mentioned, just so helpful. I think for me, it's the stones. It has to do with, instead of throwing stones at your partner, it's just throwing the stones away. It's that rolling the stone away. It is the not even having them in your little purse, your little latchel there to just get away. Yeah, it's not even a part of who you are is wanting to attack or to attack back, but it's blessings, it's kindness, it's compassion, it's love. Yeah, that dangerous love. Yeah, that you talk about, and that includes those open arms is a vulnerable position too. Having open arms, you're going to get smacked, possibly, right? So it's man, what a wonderful metaphor. So I sure appreciate you coming on today and sharing so much wisdom and tips for us.
Thanks for all you're doing. It's really important work.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, friends, for joining us for another episode of Stronger Marriage Connection podcast. We'll see you next time.
And remember, it's the small and simple things that create a stronger marriage connection. Take good care of you and each other. Bye-bye now.
Thanks for joining us today. Hey, do us a favor and take a second to subscribe to our podcast and the Utah Marriage Commission YouTube channel at Utah Marriage Commission, where you can watch this and every episode of the show. Be sure to smash the like button, leave a comment, and share this episode with a friend. You can also follow and interact with us on Instagram at Stronger Marriage Live and Facebook at Stronger Marriage. So be sure to share with us which topics you loved or which guests we should have on the show next. If you want even more resources to improve your marriage or relationship connection, visit strongermarriage.org, where you'll find free workshops, e-courses, in-depth webinars, relationship surveys, and more. Each episode of Stronger Marriage Connection is hosted and sponsored by the Utah Marriage Commission at Utah State University. And finally, a big thanks to our producer, Rex Polanis, and the team at Utah State University, and you, our audience. You make this show possible. The opinions, findings, conclusions, and recommendations expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views of the Utah Marriage Commission.